Welcome to the Outsmart Overeating podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Hooper. And today, Coach Steph Miramontes and I are going to be discussing the topic of why you overeat. But first, of course, we need to bring to your attention that we are going to be opening the doors to the signature psychology-based weight loss program, Unstuffed, on April 22nd. We'll be accepting new members. So you want to be sure to get on the interest list so you get early bird announcements and access to bonuses that the general population who does not sign up for the interest list does not get access to. And just for clarity, there is zero obligation if you join the interest list. We're not going to show up at your door and force you to join. It's just so you get access to those exclusive resources. So show notes is where you can find that link. And as always, you can drop me a message or a DM. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. All right, Steph, let's get into it. One thing I want our listeners to think about as we discuss this is my challenge is really with this episode to get them thinking about food differently and to get curious about the real reasons why we overeat. I think a lot of what we hear in mainstream is blaming the food, the quality of the food. It's just too good, or it is engineered for us to overeat. There's been mandates and, in other countries, an attempt, I guess, or an enforcement might be a better way of saying it, of actually creating laws that prevent there being as much sugar or, different portions or the amount of food that's able to be served or the ingredients specifically. So I just like to get a little bit of your thoughts on what you've observed with regards to how that may be, why we're focusing so much on the external factors that contribute to food and the overconsumption of it versus the underlying reasons why we might feel compelled to overeat.
Well, I think it's interesting because obviously there's something to it, right? Our culture is very food focused, and not that it's just our culture. Cultures around the world are very food focused, but not in the same way we are. Everybody knows everything is bigger in Texas. That's where I live. So we get these turkey platters full of food, and that's for one person and things like that. So I think the reason people focus so much on it is because, for one, the food industry as a whole has shifted a lot over the last, 20, 30, 40 years. And continues to shift. Access and availability to easy, convenient food is more abundant than it's ever been. And it's also something that seems like an obvious way to control, because we have this connection of, if you eat too much, you gain weight, therefore you should stop eating so much. The problem comes in where, unless something really drastic changes and we just start knocking out McDonald's, around every street and be like, you're a no, not going to happen. At least I doubt in our lifetime. Then we need to understand why this easy access to food, this abundance of availability, is becoming a problem. Why are we driven to do it? Because your body's full, right? You're not hungry. You don't actually need food. You've already eaten. Maybe, people joke about like second breakfast and things along those lines. And it's like, you already ate. And then you get to the office and people have brought in donuts or cookies and coffee and things like that. And it's like, well, I could eat again. It's like, well, how come? And we just need to understand the emotional, psychological, and environmental drivers that get us to make those overconsumption choices. It's much easier to blame the hyper palatable foods, the good tasting foods, because who even understands the rest of it? Very few people.
Yeah, and I don't want to minimize that. Literally, that is the food industry's responsibility. They want to line their pockets with money in order for them to do so, right? They are going to make the tastiest, most delicious version of whatever to ensure that they're continuing to make money. Now, I will say that there's been a big swing in trying to healthify cookies and soft drinks and the like, but the reality is from my perspective, the responsibility really is on us. And I do think that, of course, our environment has become more food focused, more convenient than ever. Our portions have quadrupled basically since the 70s. And so that combined with the fact that we are more sedentary than ever, especially here in the United States, obviously, we're kind of the butt of the joke around the world with how Americans are obese and 70% of our country is actually overweight. But it's not just because we have yummy food that's easily accessible at all points in time. As you just indicated, Steph, there's emotional underlying reasons at play that are contributing to the overconsumption of food. And so we really have to ask ourselves, why the hell are we eating so much? And the diet and food industry have responded with skinny popcorn, skinny margaritas, belly wraps, 8-minute abs, and detox diets. But I think this is completely missing the point. The reason why we struggle to stop eating has nothing to do with food. And as a result, the solutions we've been offered, though, have been, by mainstream, I guess, have been pretty misguided. The often thing that I share on social media is this concept or idea around changing your diet isn't going to solve your desire to overeat, because the reason why you overeat has nothing to do with food. And what you just said, Steph, we eat too much because what we're truly hungry for might not be available. Perhaps there is an emotional component, a psychological component at play here.
Yeah, it's really complex and nuanced, which is why I think it's important to have these conversations, and when available, have somebody kind of guide you through this in your own life if it's something that you struggle with, because clearly not everyone does, right? Not every single human, at least in the US, struggles with this same overconsumption of food. And so if it is the food, and the food is addicting, and the food is problematic, aren't we all addicted? Aren't we all struggling with this same addiction? Isn't the food doing this to everyone? And the answer to that question is no, it's definitely not. There are plenty of people that rarely think about food at all, that only think about food when their body decides, like, hey, bitch, I'm hungry. Want to feed me? That would be grand. So that's the first food thought that they actually have throughout the day. And so if that's the case, I really like Food Science Babes Instagram, because she really breaks down some of these myths and things blown out of proportion when it comes to, oh, well, it's the food that is the problem. It's like, yeah, food actually should taste good. We have taste buds. We probably want to enjoy our food, but it misses a huge mark when we focus just on controlling the food, instead of looking inward and saying, why do I even want to eat in the first place? Sure, sometimes it's just an environmental trigger. Sometimes it's just like, hey, cookies, that looks good. No more thought required. Just, that's that. But oftentimes it's the things we do consistently and habitually that are creating these problems for us. We come home, we're stressed, we're tired. It's been a day. Maybe we didn't even get to have our lunch that day. We've just been taking care of everyone else's needs. Maybe we're taking care of the kids or things at work, or both. And then we walk right through the door exhausted, needing energy, needing something. And, we end up overeating because it's the afternoon and we need a little something to bridge the gap between our two jobs, the work job and the home job, or a million other things. We just use it to learn to cope with stress, to soothe sadness, to tolerate uncomfortable situations at work and things like that. It's pretty big. And most of the time, in my experience, people don't understand what they're eating about. Sometimes they're aware that they're emotional eaters. Sometimes they're aware that they're stress eaters. But when we really start to break it down and pull things apart, they're like, oh, gosh, I didn't even know I was doing that. I didn't know that that was connected to why I'm overeating or over drinking or snacking, picking whatever, pick your problem.
Right. Even Dion, the client that we had on the podcast last week, indicated that when she heard of overeating, her brain went to binging. And there's so many different ways that we are overeating. It doesn't always have to be these massive overeats. In fact, I would argue for most people that it's much more subtle. And this is why people who lose weight hit their plateaus and feel stuck and frustrated, because maybe they've made all the changes, but there's still these little blind instances of a handful of nuts here or the glass of wine there that adds up little by little. And so I'm with you. The reality is so much of our overeating is rooted in a feeling first and foremost. So if we're not physically hungry, but we have a desire to eat, now mental hunger has surfaced, or emotional hunger, that's our clue to get curious. And of course, the food industry is going to keep their vending machines full and the snack packs readily available. And that's their job. But it's your job to get clarity on the reasons why you emotionally eat. And I think it's really fascinating how people will go their entire lives with weight loss being their biggest pain point, top 3 worries in their life. But yet very few will actually pick up a book on food psychology or read something about emotional eating and try to get clarity on, why do I self-sabotage? Why do I know how to follow a diet or a weight loss plan, but I can't stick to it? And that's all rooted in our thoughts and our beliefs and our identity and how we show up for ourselves. And so I think it's important to recognize that if we're not physically hungry, then we are probably hungry for something else. It could be, I don't know, maybe you're feeling rejected. And so you need a hug or validation, or, we're not feeling good enough, or, maybe we need a kind word from a parent who doesn't validate us or say kind things often, right? Or, maybe a boss who acknowledges your extra work that you're putting in. I mean, these are all reasons, when we peel back the layers, of why we really do eat outside of hunger. But I don't think most people recognize that.
I would 100% agree with you. You talk about why not read a book on the psychology of eating and things like that. It's like, first of all, they're few and far between compared to the books on how to eat more vegetables, be a keto hero, and like all that other dumb shit that busts everybody's bookshelves. But also,
I've never heard of a keto hero.
I'm sure it's there. If not, like, you're welcome to whoever's listening to this that wants to write a keto book. I just named it for you. Anyway, because Leslie and I are awesome at naming things, let me just tell you. It's like the biggest pain point. It is all 3 of the top 3 pain points in our life. So no, but like when you think about why not pick up something on the psychology of food, I think you have to have quite a bit of self-awareness. And I think the world is changing. We're talking more about therapy. There are more Instagram pages and YouTube channels and things like that that talk about these emotional things, trauma and all of that. So people are starting to connect dots, but I don't think they always have connected dots. I remember myself when I was struggling, when I found out I was emotional eating because I was eating to procrastinate, I didn't look at that as a psychological problem. I really looked at that as, why do I keep opening and closing the fridge? Like, I was just in here. And when I really started to put the pieces together, then it made sense. Then it clicked. But my version of emotional eaters was Hollywood's version, crying on the couch with the ice cream or the chips after a breakup and feeling sorry for yourself and like all of that. And sure, that's one element of it, but I would say that's the rare element of it. Emotional eating happens in the micro moments throughout the day when we are just trying to solve small problems, small emotional problems all day long.
Absolutely. Even the all or nothing mindset is so, just that one belief, that one thought that I've ruined the day, cascades into thousands of calories, maybe consumed that day, the following day, the entire weekend, and beyond. And so just that one single thought of like, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, I have to be perfect to succeed, can be responsible for so many chronic episodes of overeating because we're stuck kind of on that hamster wheel due to that one belief. But I agree, this isn't common knowledge. I mean, I've talked about even reading Janine Roth's book, Women, Food, and God, when I was in my late 20s, and it just went right over my head. I was like, yeah, but give me the shortcut. Like, tell me how to eat less, right? I wasn't ready for the message. But I'm hoping by having these conversations, we are able to reach people and invite them to consider a different perspective. Because the reality is, if you have been dieting for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and you're unable to lose weight and keep it off permanently, and it's now hijacked your life to where you spend 70% of your day thinking about food. When you're eating your lunch, you're thinking about dinner. It's probably time to try something a little different, or at least be open enough to exploring the possibility, because self-sabotage doesn't just show up in our relationship with food. It shows up in our relationships at work or with our loved ones. And I think we do tend to be pretty oblivious to this until somebody helps turn on the light in the room that we're in. And we're like, oh shit, there's like a lot of stuff in here that I can unpack, or that I haven't even acknowledged or seen before. So I think that is the value in mentorship and having somebody kind of help you see your blind spots in a way.
I agree with you. It's one of those things where even when people do start to put these pieces together, like, okay, maybe I'm an emotional eater, maybe it is emotions driving this behavior and those kinds of things, then I see some other all or nothing bullshit happen in a new way. It's like, okay, then I need to fix every single thing in my life before I can change any of my eating behaviors. I need to change all of my emotions. And then they try to find a way to feel good all the time and avoid any uncomfortable emotion. And I'm like, you are doing the same thing. This is just the same thing, right? We need to be willing to kind of walk through some of these uncomfortable emotions and circumstances so that we can decide how much of it is actually appropriate in our life, is trying to tell us something, how much of it is saying, hey, could you pay attention to this so that we can do something different? It's asking you for change. And when you see those things, sometimes it's easy to say, hey, you know what, actually, what I would love to do is count my calories, because this shit is scary. You mean I have to change my life? I have to want like that whole I hate my job thing, or I'm unhappy in my marriage thing, or my kids drive me nuts and I don't feel like I'm a good mother thing. Like I have to look at that. No, give me the calorie counter. ASAP, back to MyFitnessPal, it's a no. And so you really do have to be brave to be willing to walk through this. But this is the only permanent way, without making food a full-time job, without making food something that you are constantly thinking about. And the side benefits of understanding, working through, and dropping the shame around your emotions is literally life-changing. It is wild what you can accomplish and how different you can be with just a year of really focusing on accepting, acknowledging, understanding your emotions, and working with them so that you can make choices more in alignment with who you are.
Yeah, I mean, we also see this with body image, right? We will step on the scale. We will feel bloated around our menstrual cycle. We will see a photo of ourselves that makes us cringe and upset. And then we immediately go to fix-it mode, where we are calculating our calories, breaking down our macros. We just have to try harder. And that is an emotional response that contributes. I think that really highlights like a clear path how being unhappy in your body triggers a desire for control, your food, your exercise, to, of course, get to the desired outcome so you don't have to continue being in your pain. We think weight loss is going to be the solution to that, right? And so how many times, Steph, have we maybe ourselves experienced, but certainly experienced in our own clients, losing weight and still being just as dissatisfied in their body? Perhaps you can look at a photo of yourself from 30 pounds lighter and remember it's still not feeling good enough. I absolutely can. And so this is how we know that this is not just about losing weight. This goes so much deeper than that. And those are the conversations that you have to be willing to have if we're talking about true permanent, lifelong weight loss. And frankly, that's all we're offering on this podcast. So if you just want quick fix hacks and overnight success stories, which are all bullshit anyway, then like this probably isn't the podcast for you.
I think that when people really do want that quick fix, you said it, right? They just want to be out of pain. And when you understand what's causing your pain, then you can get out of it so much faster, even if you haven't gotten to the end result yet. Because we see, even with our clients, we're like, what is the most surprising thing that you learned throughout this program? And when they are 4, 6, 8 months in, they start talking about how different their life is, how less often, I mean, Dion was even talking about, like, she's not body checking. Like, her goal was to stop looking at herself in the mirror and thinking like, ugh, all the time. And she was like, I just haven't hardly done that at all anymore. You start to really shift who you are. But to your point, people want this desperate attempt at changing their body because they think that their body is causing their pain. Their body isn't causing their pain. I mean, unless you have some sort of physical, actual pain caused by your body, but generally it's an emotional pain because you think you're not good enough. You think that your body should be different than it is, and that it means something about you, that it says something about you. And no wonder, the world is an asshole. It will tell you that that's the truth, but we've got to learn how to have our own back here, because you cannot change a body, not sustainably, that you hate. You don't take care of anything that you hate, that you loathe, that you are wanting to avoid or forget about. So
I also think that there's a lot of comfort in the short-term fix. At least in a diet, you get to experience fleeting moments of instant gratification. You get that little brief pat on the back for ordering a salad or skipping dessert, right? I think our difficulty isn't always in managing the calorie intake. Although if you had told me that 20 years ago, I definitely would have said that is. But I think it's more about developing self-compassion and patience and kindness that are genuinely fulfilling. And like you just indicated, falling in love with ourselves, or at least respecting ourselves. So we're no longer constantly seeking external validation to feel whole. We're learning the tools, the emotional tools, to do that for ourselves. And then that noise about society starts to get quieter, and our self-respect and self-love starts to get a little louder. And so now we're more anchored and in alignment with our values. So overeating doesn't start to feel like or maybe it's not a loving thing to do anymore. Maybe it's a way to mistreat ourselves, right? And so the diet industry it has us clinging on to the symptoms of our unhappiness, not the causes. And I think as a result, their solutions are just very temporary and for most, in a lot of frustration and hopelessness. But it's my belief that diets can't make us thin because they don't actually directly engage with what made us fat, right? It's not that we eat too much because we lack willpower or aren't trying hard enough. We overeat because we're still feeling emotionally empty of the ingredients that we ultimately really crave.
it's always interesting to watch that evolution in a client, watch them go from, I absolutely need to figure this out and take control, and I feel so out of control, to I am in control. I'm in more control than I ever believed I was. And shifting from, I need to change this because I'm so sick of looking at myself and I hate myself, to I'm changing this because I care so much about the quality of life I'm living. And I care so much about taking good care of myself. And I see myself in a completely different light. And so some of that shift has to happen. We say where the mind goes, or where the mind goes, the body follows. And it couldn't be more true in the way that we work with our clients in their relationship with food and changing this. I mean, even programs like intuitive eating and things like that, they talk about very, very little of this emotional stuff. They're just like, you should eat when you're hungry and stop when it's enough. And then they do kind of talk about, especially lately, more so in the recent years since they've been facing, a little bit more criticism, that there are other emotional reasons why someone might eat, and that some of those reasons are smart. And there is mind hunger, and there is taste hunger, and there is all these other things. And it's like, cool. But that to me is like, we can understand those things and we can have the nuance around the conversation. We can make decisions about those things with eyes wide open. But when we say these are all intuitive reasons to eat, then we're saying, and if you indulge that, it's absolutely fine. There are no consequences. You're going to feel great about yourself because that's just the way life is. That's not the way this works, right? We can't just turn it into the hunger and fullness diet. We can't just turn it into this, well, we can eat for any and all reasons without consequences. And then we should just accept that this is our natural body. We have to understand the environmental influences and the psychological ones and the emotional ones and put all those pieces together so that we can be in alignment, so that we can be in integrity with our body, our emotions, our mind, all of it. I mean, I could get as woo as we want to here. This whole mind, body, soul conversation can get quite big, but it's just interesting to see both sides of the pendulum miss the mark so profoundly.
Yeah, I want to be very clear to our listeners. We are supportive and even fans, I think, of the 10 intuitive eating principles, but where we really start to carve out a message that's quite different, and I'm not going to get into it in great detail, is that we are very comfortable helping our clients lose weight without calorie counting, without limiting specific foods, by helping them unravel their emotional ties to food. And as I often say, the only way to kind of leave it, or lose it permanently. Wow, I'm having a hard time spitting out my sentence here. Is to ultimately meet your emotional needs in a fulfilling way. And I think that means honoring and respecting your body as well, because I've overeaten many times in my life and it never feels like a win. It never feels like self-care. It never feels like, I can't wait to do that again. So learning to eat in a way that feels good does ultimately result in weight loss, which is why I think we spend so much more time focusing on the psychology than just hammering the habits and how to get that down to a science. It's more about merging the two and allowing both of them to work together to create an outcome of weight loss, but without it being forced or coming from a place of self-loathing, right? And rather that look a lot more like self-care. So one thing I would just invite our listeners to think about or consider is this week, before you take a bite of food, try to understand what your true motives are for eating. I always say, if hunger is not the problem, then food is not the solution. And so that little mantra really helped me start to get clarity around my emotions and what was causing me to want to eat when I wasn't physically hungry. And I just started asking myself, okay, food wasn't available. What would I be doing instead? Right? I would just maybe have to sit in this discomfort, or what am I really eating about here?
No question at all that the habits have to be in place. Nothing changes if nothing changes behaviorally. It's like I said earlier, a lot of clients are like, oh, now I have to fix everything in my whole life before I can change anything behaviorally. No, this happens side by side. But you can't have one without the other. You can't try to control the food without an emotional consequence. And you can't just try to fix all the emotions by escaping all of the emotions without a physical consequence. And so we, I think, do a pretty good job in our program of building a bridge between the two things, making it actionable and understanding the deep underlying whys and reasons and influences that make people create habits of overeating, because that's really what it often turns into, is a habit of overeating long after the initial reason has been resolved or is gone. Sometimes that shit starts in childhood.
A lot of the time, our parents are our primary influences. And so if they have a habit of cleaning their plate or eating in front of the TV, I mean, chances are you're likely to develop that same ritual. So All right. Well, that is it for us today. But one thing I do want to mention is if this episode resonates with you, if you are interested in learning more about your psychological, emotional ties to food or the reasons why you eat when you're not physically hungry, then Coach Steph and I would love to help. That is why we are here. This is what we do. It's our passion. It's our focus. So make sure you get on the interest list for Unstuffed. This is where we create an environment for our clients to thrive. We only open the doors twice a year. And so if you don't get on the interest list now, you might have to wait until fall to get a shot again. So that again is in the show notes. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. We will catch you next week. Have a good week, y'all.